Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the arcs that I read in the month of July. You haven't heard much from me this month in the way of actual book content. I've posted a couple of hauls, the whole pick my book thing, sure, the stuff that I do, but I haven't actually told you about any books that I've read. But the good news is I can tell you about some actual books in this video. It includes all of the arcs that I read for the month of July, a total of 5 of them. That was intense. It's been intense. I don't know how I ended up with 5 arcs to get read in the month of July, but I clearly hate myself and ought not to do that ever again. I gotta say, I got my handy dandy little reading journal here, which I recently just started doing, so don't think I'm that organized because I'm not. So first, I read The Whisper Network. This is by Chandler Baker. This was released on July 2nd, the very beginning of the month. It is also, or was also, Reese Witherspoon's book of her book club, the pick for Reese Witherspoon's book club for the month of, I believe, July. I guess, I don't know. I don't really follow it. I just, you can't really avoid that kind of thing. The Whisper Network is the story of 4 working women, all employed by the same sporting goods corporation. So you have Sloan, Artie, Grace, and Rosalita. And they've all either been sexually harassed in the workplace or witnessed sexual harassment in their workplace. And the big bad wolf of the story, Ames, at the very beginning of the book, he dies. And so the rest of the book is uncovering who's to blame, who's at fault, and how big of a scumbag and how deserving of death was this Ames guy. Really, the Whisper Network ends up being a social commentary on the whole #MeToo movement going on in society today. The author herself says that, the book is written from her own experiences she's a lawyer, her own experiences in that world, in that corporate world, and those of her friends. So it's obvious that this book has an intention, right? Unfortunately, and this is going to come off sounding really strange, I can't connect with that experience much. I mean, yeah, I'm a woman, and yeah, I have feelings about the ways in which women are sometimes treated. However, I've never personally experienced it, and so I just didn't connect with this book. It was okay. I will say this. This is a very well-written book. I think there's 4 different narratives total in this book. Each woman has a voice. Each woman has a unique experience. The author obviously paid very close attention to the experiences of her friends and colleagues. It comes off as very well thought out. I mean, the author, Chandler Baker, clearly has something to say, and I think that she's said it in the best way possible. This is her debut novel. It's really well written. I mean, it really is. There just wasn't enough of a connection between me and the story to make it onto my favorites list. I gave it 3.5 stars because A, I think it's an important book. B, I think that this book definitely has a huge audience, and I am in the minority by not being able to really immerse myself in the story. C, it's a pretty decent murder mystery. We have a group of 4 women, and even among them, the closest friends and colleagues in this workplace, they don't know what happened to this person. Only one person knows how Ames is killed or why Ames was killed. And so trust inside of the friend group begins to break down because they're not sure whose fault all of this is. And, it's an interesting murder mystery. It does have unlikable characters. You should know that going in. I don't find any of these women particularly enjoyable, but I think that both works for the story and against it. Unlikable characters significantly impact a lot of people's enjoyment of a book, but when you're drawing attention to an issue like this, You don't want people standing behind a character's convictions simply because they're a nice person. You know what I mean? Like, I think that it goes a lot further for the issue that it addresses when a reader can still support a character without the bias of necessarily liking them. Does that make any sense? Am I making any sense here? Why do I always ask that? I always have to ask you if I'm making sense. If this sounds like a book that you might enjoy, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably will enjoy it. Like I said, I don't think there's anything about the writing or the structure or the storytelling or the plot that's going to like make you miserable. I think that sometimes it's not as exciting and gripping as you want it to be. It sort of moves along at a slow pace where there's 4 women that we're actually getting to know pretty intimately. So it's not going to move along at breakneck speed. It can't possibly do that. So slower paced, well-written mystery thriller debut from Chandler Baker that has something important to say. I just didn't connect with it. Next, on July 9th, One Little Secret by Cate Holahan was released. This was an arc that I had had for way longer than I'm comfortable admitting. It was available as a read now title, and I snatched it up. 3 couples who know each other because they're neighbors and their kids attend the same school. But when their kids go to summer camp, these 3 couples decide to rent a beach house and spend some adult time together. Unfortunately, everything goes to pot in the beach house, and one of them ends up dead. So if you like a closed door mystery, this is probably going to get you really close to those experiences. It is one of those books that has a lot of surprising moments throughout, shocking reveals throughout the book, but then the end isn't that shocking. I don't know how I feel about that. I ended up also giving this one 3.5 stars. So again, a good book. It definitely has a lot of things going for it, but there are definitely some things that are holding it back. This book has a really great structure. It cycles between the day before, the day of, and the day after. So it's a 3-day timeline, but it cycles between those 3 days. I really like that. I really like that structure quite a bit. Kind of an interesting way to give a book a dual timeline, because I'm really sick of the standard way a book gets a dual timeline. There's definitely some links between these characters that lurk beneath the surface of friendly everyday life. Those were the things that were the biggest reveals, or the most shocking reveals to me. There's more that meets the eye than these characters' relationships. And so you get snippets of each pairing of people, each character, small insights into their lives, into their relationships. But that's all under the umbrella of this murder mystery being conducted by a detective named Gabby. I have her in my rating journal as Gabby Detective. The book also starts under some unrelated circumstances involving Gabby that leave me questioning why they were included. Gabby, as a character, is kind of weak. If we're going to include so much emphasis on the detective in charge of the case, then I think we need to go all in with that character and really make the book more about that character or less about that character. We got to go one way or the other. But Gabby just sort of exists. I think my problem with Gabby is that she distances the reader from the actual plot. Or it could be like a crime thriller and really involve the detective and really dive into the detective's life in a major way. I'm just tossing ideas around in my head for how it could have been better. It wasn't bad. I still think Cate Holahan does some incredible things. The structure, the way she structures her books, the bones of her stories are really interesting to me. I've only read 2, so I can't say that this is like a trademark of hers per se, but the bones of her stories are really interesting. Also, I think that Cate Holahan takes some classic tropes of the genre and presents them in interesting ways. So we're talking different forms of domestic conflict, alcoholism, infidelity, abuse, those sorts of things that are popular aspects of this genre. I think Cate Holahan gives them to me in a more interesting way than anybody else does. It doesn't feel like a trope when it's in a Cate Holahan book. It feels like something you need to absorb and pay attention to in an aspect of each character's motivation or experiences. Whereas a lot of domestic thrillers, and I mentioned feeling this way with The Waif Between Us, which was a really good book. I think in my review I mentioned, so of course one of the spouses drinks, of course one of the spouses abuses the other, of course, you know what I mean? Like there's all of these things that just repeatedly show up in a domestic thriller. And it gets tedious, but in both of Cate Holahan's books, it doesn't feel tedious. It feels vital and fresh. And that's probably the biggest credit that I can give to Cate Holahan and to One Little Secret in particular. So, oh my goodness. Next, I also this was July 2nd. Whoops. I jumped the gun. Anyways, the order is not important. The content is important. I read the book Temper by Layne Fargo. The story of the Chicago theater scene, most specifically one theater house run by a pair of roommates / long-term friends, Malcolm and Joanna. And their theater house is producing a 2-character play called Temper. And Malcolm is the star. Playing opposite Malcolm is a girl named Kira. The story opens with Kira's day of audition, and immediately the conflict rears its ugly head. Malcolm wants Kira to be in the play, Joanna does not. And so what ensues is this crazy, dramatic, incestuous, erotically menacing story about 6 people in their crazy relationships with each other. From the very beginning of this book, this heavily weighted tone of suspense and apprehension settles upon the reader. And when you're reading it that at any moment, one of 2 things could happen. Either some of the most passionate, wild, crazy monkey sex you've ever read about, or some of the most passionate, wild, crazy monkey violence could happen. Every moment of this book is building up to one of the 2. You just don't know which, and you turn the page expecting it every time. Like, oh my God, somebody's gonna die, or somebody's gonna get some, or holy crap. There are 6 people in this book that make you feel this way. It's super dramatic. These are super dramatic characters. They're career theater people, writers and actors and fight choreographers. Now, unfortunately, all of that suspense and all of that buildup, the climax of the story, which happens literally pages from the end, doesn't do it justice. Not necessarily the event. I think that, I'm trying not to spoil it, I think that the event that unfolds is pretty significant. It stands to reason that this is what we've been building towards this entire time, but I don't think it's written about in a way that drives it home. It's a kind of a letdown. This book is incredible if you're interested in tone, if you like the buildup of suspense, if you want to be kind of twisted up inside, wondering what's going to happen. This book has an atmosphere. It's thick. It's thick, it's palpable. You're living it. You're living the atmosphere of this book while you're reading this book. The plot is weaker than the overall tone and atmosphere of the book. At the end of the day, here's my problem. So at the end of the day, we've got 6 people, some more important to the story than others, but basically 6 people who have some skin in the game. And each of these 6 people is pretty significantly tied to every other person in some way, shape, or form. They all share some common connection or some common bond. And some of those relationships are extremely contentious. People wish ill will on others, and it's very, like I said, palpable. Like, you can feel it. It's very realistic. Dramatic, and yet, realistic. So when we build up to the climax, anything could happen. Any one of these characters could go off at any moment. And yet, the 2 people involved in the climax of this story are probably the 2 people with the best relationship with each other. The 2 that don't really have as many feelings of ill will as any of the other 6 people with any of the other 6 people. So that was surprising, but not necessarily in a good way. Like, that made me question why certain decisions were made. And ultimately, I just would have taken, if it were me, I would have taken the book in a different direction and really shocked the reader and written about it in a very shocking way. I wanted this book, like, for those of you who read Inspection, Inspection by Josh Malerman built up to a truly shocking crescendo, realization, resolution. And I wanted that kind of ending inserted at the end of Temper. I wanted it to be so holy crap, because the rest of the book had been so holy crap. I mean, these people were like, there were some serious issues with these people that I wanted what it kept building towards to be that memorable. And ultimately, it wasn't that memorable. So again, if you're a tone, atmosphere, suspense kind of person, or if you like, theater and know what it's like to perform and know what it's like to be a screenwriter or a stage director or whatever, you might really get a kick out of Temper. You'd at least be able to tell how realistic this is. Unfortunately, I don't have any of that experience, so it's just a very ambiguous book built solely on tone. Next, I read The Chain by Adrian McKinty, and this book was a little bit more my taste, my style, my kind of thing. So The Chain is about a kidnapping ring, a kidnapping and ransom ring. And it works like this. I get a phone call that my loved one has been kidnapped. In order to free my loved one, I have to pay a ransom and kidnap someone else's loved one. That someone will get the same phone call that I got. And I won't get my loved one back until my victims kidnap someone else's loved one. The cycle just goes on and on and on. A really interesting concept, like super great concept, for sure. The story follows Rachel, who is the mother of Kylie. Rachel is a cancer survivor, and she gets a phone call the same day she learns that her cancer has returned, that her daughter Kylie has been kidnapped. And in order to get Kylie back, she has to pay a ransom and kidnap someone else's loved one. The story goes on to follow Rachel through this chain of events, no pun intended. She enlists the help of her former brother-in-law, who has been discharged from the military, a drug problem, and PTSD. She recruits his help in this whole process. I really thought that this book would be a tight, small time frame, fast-paced thriller that just dealt with Rachel's experience with the chain. in fact, the book, I don't want to give anything away, but in fact, the book goes well beyond the resolution of the kidnapping. Like, Rachel's daughter was kidnapped, and when that's resolved in the way that it's resolved, the book continues to go on with the effects, with the consequences of being included in this chain and what it does to you psychologically, both as a victim and as a perpetrator. How do you live with the guilt of putting someone else through that? And how do you feel relief when you feel guilt? And how do you, it just got way more into it than I kind of wanted it to or expected it to. So I was a little disappointed that it wasn't that book that I assumed that it would be, which is totally unfair of me. I shouldn't do that. This concept is grand and great and wonderful, and I wanted it to be something that was in fact insurmountable, that maybe these characters could not overcome, that maybe, I guess I'm borderline spoiling this. I don't want to do that. But the creators of the chain, the masterminds behind the chain, the reason for its existence was not even remotely as sorry, it just got really bright in here, was not even remotely as profound as I wanted it to be. Like, this elaborate scheme and this setup and this, it was epic. And I wanted the origin story to be epic. I wanted the final showdown to be epic. And I was a little let down by how common and maybe cliche the book became at the end, because it did start out as truly 100% original. And so, I'm walking away giving this 4 stars that I think it deserves. There's a lot of aspects in this book that required probably a lot of thought and a lot of research and a lot of intelligence to, put on the page. And I both in concept and because of those qualities, I admire the book quite a bit. I think it's admirable, but it does fall into a couple of cliche traps. One of which involves the actual antagonist of the story, and the other involves the relationship and how it plays out between Rachel, her ex-husband, and her ex-husband's brother, Pete. Those were the minuses. But a book way more indicative of the kind of book that I like to read. And I do recommend it to thriller lovers who really love those unique and original concepts, because it's rare. That's all I just said. It's rare in books. Finally, the most recently released book, which I believe was July 23rd, A Stranger on the Beach by Michelle Campbell. This book is probably the winner of my July arcs, with The Chain coming in a close second. But the book follows Caroline and Aiden. Caroline has built this extravagant beach home. She's very wealthy, only she starts having some serious marital troubles, and her husband waver between divorcing or reconciling. They have a daughter in college, and Caroline's life quickly goes downhill. She ends up seeking comfort in the arms of our hot local townie Aiden, who has a very questionable past and is quite troubled. So the story is told in a dual narrative, from Caroline's perspective, which is first person, to Aiden, his is third person limited. So Caroline is saying I all the time. And when we're reading about Aiden, we're reading about him as Aiden. Aiden did this, Aiden did that, Aiden did this. So basically the book is set up to make you wonder who's telling the truth. You have 2 unreliable narrators with very conflicting versions of the same events. So you read a portion from Caroline's point of view where she tells you what happened, and it usually paints Aiden in a very negative light. And then you read Aiden's version of events, which present him as this misunderstood, very sensitive, easily taken advantage of, naive, sort of victimized character who maybe doesn't have a great grasp on adult relationships and reality per se. He might be a bit of a dreamer, you know, that guy who calls and calls and calls and calls and calls and can't take a hint. That kind of perspective. So both of your narrators are completely unreliable. You have no idea who's telling the truth. And you're reading about things pretty much real time, building up to something that will crash and burn and break these two storylines down to the truth. It's shocking. It messes with the reader psychologically because it gives you a very clear cut, very undeniable, unwavering version of events. And then they're typically shocking. They're typically horrifying. They're about a man who is stalking a woman, and then you read his side and you're like, oh my God. It reminded me a lot of Watch Me by Jody Gurman, which is this story of a man who stalks a woman while courting her and getting her to let down her guard around him. Like, he has some very sinister motives, but she warms to him, and like, you can watch this train wreck as it happens and you can understand why she likes him, but you know that it's going to be disastrous. Likewise, that's how this feels. Caroline doesn't necessarily like Aiden. She thinks he's terrifying, but from Aiden's perspective, he thinks he loves her, and it's just this crazy back and forth game of brain ping pong. Meanwhile, Caroline's husband is meeting people in alleys, giving them cash, bringing strange women around. What he's up to, we don't know. That's part of the debate between Caroline and Aiden. Aiden's convinced that Caroline is in danger from her husband. Caroline's convinced that her husband just needs to pay a little bit more attention to her. Meanwhile, she's sure she's in danger from Aiden. It's quite delicious, really. It's quite delicious and exciting, and it definitely keeps you engaged. You're definitely not bored while you're reading this book. At least I wasn't. Things wrap up. It's satisfying. I mean, I could pick I could pick some things out to be critical about, but overall, I think this is a book that the experience of it is what you go on. I had a great experience reading this book. I enjoyed it. I found myself, I was like, wow. I had wow moments several times throughout this book. Like, holy crap, I can't believe that guy just did that. Or, oh my gosh, what is going on? And so, yeah, it's suspenseful. But when you get about halfway through the book, like, things really start to squeeze you a little bit. Like, you get a little squeezed a little bit tighter. You're really not sure what either of these two people are capable of. You know, you have as many suspicions about Caroline as you have about Aiden. That's for sure. And I really felt that neither of them were the victim. This could go either way. These two people could be capable of absolutely anything. And you just wait to find out when the other shoe is going to drop. This A Stranger on the Beach by Michelle Campbell. It's a fun time. It's the kind of book that really solidifies my understanding of liking psychological fiction or psychological thrillers more than, say, domestic thrillers and such. It's superbly engaging as a psychological thriller, and you definitely feel like your mind has been totally messed with the entire time you're reading this book, and you just want to know who the bad guy is, and you just want to know who the good guy is. And so, psychological thriller for sure. So there you have it. Those are the arcs that I read in July, all 5 of them. And I'm sorry that I had so many arcs to read in July that I didn't deliver as much bookish content through the month as I wanted to. I'm also sorry that it happened to fall in a busy time where I couldn't do a dedicated video for each book like I typically like to do when it comes to arcs. But things are crazy, and I'm proud that I even got these 5 books read at this point. Let me know what you think about the 5 books that I mentioned. Again, they are The Whisper Network by Chandler Baker, One Little Secret by Cate Holahan, Temper by Layne Fargo, The Chain by Adrian McKinty, and A Stranger on the Beach by Michelle Campbell. I recommend checking them all out. It depends on who you are as a reader, but I think that each one of these 5 books definitely has an audience. And that's unusual. I didn't hate any of these books. I enjoyed something about all of them. Even if they're not going to go down in history as favorite books, even if I'm not going to run out and buy a finished copy, still, I don't consider this a wasted month. I'm glad to have the experience of all 5 of these books. Let me know which one sounds the best to you, and if you have any questions about any of them, leave those in the comment section down below, and I will be sure to answer them the best that I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.